statistics, but this meeting is regional in nature. And those people in your community that you have heard from that have been affected by this, and how we can address those different things, that's the data that we need to help propel this forward. So we'll just move right on in. I'll let you kind of take a look at the slide there at the statistics to Digital Equality 101. LSUS folks, are we getting any credit for this? Maybe a credit hour or something there? So, all right, there's four main pillars here with digital equity, and they're internet devices, application and services, and digital skills. Basically, at its essence, the internet piece is affordable, sufficient, and reliable. And can people have access to it easily? Devices, that's a strange one as things have changed in the device world. At one point, you saw desktop computers were the thing to have, and then it went to laptops. Well, now the highest growing percentage of digital device is the smartwatch. Who would have ever thought that years ago? So part of this study is taking that into account, or how are we preparing for the new devices that are growing in popularity with that so we can serve that population. As we talked about a minute ago, how important the youth were. My kids have no idea what a desktop computer is. They all have iPads. They all want watches. And so we have to prepare in that aspect to make sure that we're addressing those needs as our kids come up. Application services, this is how is it getting out there with the diverse communities, the designs, the rollout, the services considering placement, outreach, training, user control, privacy is a big one, universal designs, and language. I had the opportunity to go to an Air Force cyber thing one time, and one of the biggest things they talked about was the cyber guys, the bad guys. Basically, he related it to, they go check doors, and whatever door has the least locks on it is the one they go through. And so how are we preparing in this study to address those types of needs as well? The digital skills, this is a big one. I guarantee in this room there's a huge digital divide of some of us that I don't know much about computers, and I can barely log into my email sometimes, and there's some of us that can do all kinds of fun, fancy things, like the guys over here that were working this magic a minute ago. So those are things that we need to address in this study as well. So what is the digital divide? And we kind of go into this slide as well. Again, it's statistic driven, but the point of this slide is to kind of think through and maybe read through each line, maybe not necessarily looking specifically at the statistic, but the title of that line, and relate it to think through people in your community that you've gotten a phone call or an email or have seen riding around, or got anything of that nature. And so we're trying to kind of set the mindset or the tone of this meeting and what we're after here and what we're trying to collect with that. So you've got a lot of folks in there, you know, from the Oshners with we talked about it a second ago, home health, where you can get on your computer and do your doctor's visits there. You know, it affects the older and rural folks there. So that's kind of the mindset we're after as we talk through these different points. So I'll turn it over to Matthew Holland with the Blanco Center to talk about the digital equity plan. He's going to be the guy and his team that are going to take the data and produce what we're supposed to do with it there. So Matthew?
Yeah, thanks guys. So I mean, you know, kind of along the lines of what Bump said, we're writing this plan primarily to improve the lives of residents, especially the ones that do not have the kind of access to digital devices or internet subscriptions that a lot of us can take for granted. And so we've secured federal funding to improve the broadband infrastructure, and that's part of the process of this plan, is to secure that federal funding. In order to do that, we need to gather stakeholder engagement from you guys and you know, every region across the state. And you know, we're working with the office of, with Beneath at the Office of Broadband Development and Connectivity, the border regions, Lewis, universities, regional planning commissions, and you know, as many organizations as we can to gather input during this process. So I can kind of see these are the planning districts that we're working on and hosting these meetings. You guys are in Region 7, and you know, this is a chart of some of the stakeholders, the different stakeholder groups that represent different interests that we're trying to work with. So you have so many different needs when it comes to digital equity. So we have workforce development up there, helping people to develop the digital skills that can help them to participate in the workforce. But then we also have those who are over 60 that need access to the kind of digital healthcare services that are starting to become really prevalent. And then we also have just all of these other kind of groups of people that have different needs, and we need to provide different services and different resources to them in order to help them meet their digital needs. And so right now this is kind of the timeline for the digital equity plan and our process of gathering input and writing it. Right now we're in the stakeholder engagement process, so that'll be coming to a close soon. And then we'll begin synthesizing some of the data that we've received through you guys and through other stakeholders, as well as some of the publicly available data that is out there that we've already started compiling, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we'll be drafting the plan, and we'll do more feedback on the plan in spring. So we'll be back reaching out to you guys when that comes around. So what is the data that we have available now? A lot of it is census-based data, and we also have data from the FCC in terms of access. If you guys have your phones out and want to scan this QR code, this will take you to a dashboard that we've begun building but is still in process that lets you view issues of access and internet availability based on different things like income level or age. And then we're working on some more data that we have available to break that down by race and education type, and we'll be making some statewide comparisons to other states as well. So we'll be looking forward to that in the future. Also, as well as subscription types, because internet access is, digital equity depends not just on whether you have access or not, but also the type of access that you have. So if you only have a cellular plan and limited reliability with that plan, well, that's a much different form of access than a kind of hardline fiber internet access. And so kind of looking, like digging down into those subscription types helps us understand where we need to focus on access types and infrastructure. And then, as I mentioned, we also, as Bump mentioned earlier, it's very important to focus on access for children, so we have this data by age. All right, and I'm going to let Bump take over again, and we're gonna start the input process. I do want to say this is kind of something that we hope will be conversational. We want you to speak. We want to hear your concerns and your ideas and what you guys are using in terms of resources to address these issues.
All right, thank you.
Take notes for this process.
Okay.
You want me up here?
No, I can do it.
I can speak up.
Okay. And I also want to recognize Kathy Babers from Congressman Mike Johnson's office as well. I missed in the back there. So, all right. So we've kind of gone through the process, the timelines, the deliverables, things of that nature, and we're kind of getting to the questions. And so we've talked about the mindset we want, but I think it's important. Senator Long, when this first started, told a story and related it to his childhood. And I always thought, to me, that was an impactful story about how important this is. And so I asked him if he would mind telling that story again. I know many of you have probably heard it, but if you haven't, it's kind of cool of what this is all about. So, Senator Long?
Well, thank you and good morning. And please express to the Senator our congratulations for his reelection and for all that took time to become a candidate and for all of us who took time to vote. Having served 12 years as a state senator in District 31, I know the commitment it takes to be a public official, whether you're at the Caddo Parish Police Jury or whether you're at a regional government that drives us. I wanted to share with you, and thank you, Bump, for the privilege of sharing this story. I am 78. I was born in 1944. My father was born in 1900, and my mother in 1906. That kind of tells you a little bit about my background. I was born in Wynn Parish in a rural community called Tanny Hill. And if you leave Winfield headed toward Ruston, before you get to Dotson, you'll come to the little rural community where there are no stores, no visible signs. But I was born in 1944. My freshman year at Northwestern State, I had a college professor named Dr. Pete Gregory, who, by the way, is 95 and is still very much articulate and very much a part of the community. In the class that I took, he told us, go home and interview someone, Roy, that came through the Great Depression. Someone who has gone through the cycle of life that for us at that particular point in 1966, many of the conveniences we had, our parents did not have. So I went home and I sat with my father. I said, Dad, tell me the most life-changing event that took place in your life as you went through the Great Depression. Now keep in mind the Great Depression was principally from around 1925 to about 1936, 1938. In rural Louisiana, it took much longer to come out of the Depression. If you were raised in a small rural community, you know that times were tough. And one of the reasons that I think Huey Long is still an icon is that he saw the needs of so many people and he responded to that. So I sat down with my father. I have a little notebook. I said, tell me. I thought he would have said in 1923, I married your mother. Okay? He didn't say that. I thought he would have said the 8 sons that my wife and I produced, which my twin brother and I were the last of those 8. He didn't say that. I thought perhaps he may have talked about his experience as a young man when he came to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. He didn't mention that. What he said was incredibly interesting. He said in 1936, when we were living in this rural community of Tanny Hill, rural electricity came to our community. He said the electric co-ops began to deal with people who did not have. And he said in 1936, we got electricity. I said, well, Dad, what did you have? He looked me in the eye. He said, son, we had 1 light bulb in the kitchen. But he said it changed our lives. We went from darkness to light. Now, I want to tell you, we are living in an era today that broadband is going to become the new electricity for your children and for my children and for your grandchildren and my grandchildren. This is my 126th broadband meeting. Senator Cassidy called me, and we served together as legislators, and he says, I need a point person. And by the way, I want to compliment all of our congressional members of Congress who have bought into and understand the significance of broadband. So this is my 126th meeting, and here's what I tell people every time I have a moment to speak. You're going to see what broadband did, or what broadband will do, what electricity did 100 years ago. It's going to transform how we do business. It's going to make us better at educating our children. It's going to make us better at providing health care. It's going to give first responders an opportunity to be even more diligent in what they do. It's going to create economic expansion like we haven't seen before. How many times have you heard someone say, I'd like to live in that community, but I can't get what? Internet connection. I hear it everywhere I go. Well, let me tell you, in a few years, and Venice will address this a bit later, In a few years, you're going to see a transformation in Louisiana that is going to change the way we live for the good. So when I think of my father, I think of that one light bulb that changed his life. And I wanted to share that with you.
So very, very impactful there of the reality of what we're on the cusp of and working on. I thought that was a very cool story. I know I've never lived without electricity. You live without the new electricity bills, though. That'd be helpful. But no, thank you very much. 126 meetings. Man, Beneath, you've probably been to how many?
Not 126.
Oh, man. But with that, I do want to make sure the room knows Beneath Iyengar, the governor's appointment over the broadband initiative here. And so he's going to help us walk through the questions and answers and things of that nature there. So, Beneath, if you want to take the mic or hang out for a second, it's up to you. Perfect.
So look, thanks, Bump, and thanks to all of you for participating. So just for those that I haven't met before, so I run the broadband office for Louisiana. David Lehman is our program manager. So we're a team of 3. So you've got 2/3 of our office here in Shreveport. Functionally, we sit in the Division of Administration, so I report to Commissioner Jay Darden. But broadband is one of those issues where it really cross-sects political ideology, socioeconomic challenges, and so on and so forth in terms of demographics, et cetera. In Louisiana today, 1.5 million people do not have access to high-speed internet, so that's 1 out of every 3 people in the state. And largely, they don't have it because it's either an access issue, an affordability issue, a digital skills issue, or functionally a device issue. And so, you know, the challenges in Caddo are going to be far different than the challenges in Bossier. It's going to be, you were in DeSoto Parish this past, today's Thursday, Monday. It's going to be far different, right? And the difference is going to be in how many people don't have access, how many people can't afford it, and so on and so forth. So really, it's going to be a 64 parish problem because that's what it really truly is. Now, fortunately, we've been pretty aggressive as an office to try to address the challenges. I think everyone knows what the challenges are. We're trying to tactically address these challenges through solutions. We're going to get significant amount of federal funding from the infrastructure bill. We've already received and committed $170 million from U.S. Treasury, and there's $342 million or so committed to Louisiana from the Federal Communications Commission. So I'm very bullish that the money is not going to be the issue. I'm also very bullish that we're going to get our fair share from the infrastructure bill in Louisiana to address the challenge. The key then is making sure it gets directed to where it needs to go most and to truly understand what those costs are. But also, all these investments are going to be largely a busted investment if we don't address affordability, if we don't address digital skills, if we truly don't articulate the value why people should buy broadband, right? If we lay the infrastructure and then no one's subscribing to it, have we truly done our job? So the conversations we're having today, and we're going to be in Monroe on Tuesday, and we were in the other regions this past couple of weeks, is going to be critical towards helping us as an office understand the acute challenges that are being faced by different sectoral groups, right? So healthcare will have different challenges, public safety will have different challenges, the ag community will have different challenges, teachers will have different challenges. So over the next hour and 20 minutes, what I want to do is work with Bump in truly getting you guys to provide feedback, okay, to a series of 6 or 7 questions that we're going to ask over the next several minutes, next hour plus. Because the questions we ask and the feedback we get are going to be really critical towards the development of a 5-year plan that is required by the feds for us to submit in order for us to draw down on infrastructure dollars. So I need you to put on a couple of different hats over the next hour or so. I need you to put on the hat of your official day job, whether you're a Caddo Parish chair or you're on the broadband team. I need you to put on the hat that you guys will have, assuming, you're father, teacher, you have kids, and understanding the challenges they have as a concerned citizen, but also in terms of what you think your constituents and your people are feeling when it comes to lack of broadband. Y'all have had millions of conversations with folks and understanding their challenges, and you're in all leadership positions to help address that. So I'm going to do very little talking, okay? And Bump's going to do very little talking. We're going to make this a very interactive conversation over the next hour and 20 minutes. The last thing I'm going to mention before we go into these conversations is, everyone's talking about these maps and locations. Actually, next Friday, I just got word this morning that next Friday, the first maps are going to be coming out from the feds. So the FCC will publish maps for the first time November 18th. That's address level data map. Now, is the map going to be absolutely accurate? No, but it's going to be the first solid, sort of first stake in the ground to really understand the size of the underserved challenge in Louisiana. What is this map? Yeah, so the map is, it's really a data map. It's a map that the Federal Communications Commission is putting together that has identified to an address level who is providing what, at what speeds. The problem with the current Federal Communications Commission's maps are, the maps are telling our office and telling y'all that you could get broadband speeds, but those speeds are based on a census block. So if you have 3 houses on a census block, and if the internet service provider says that first house has access to high-speed, affordable, reliable internet, then the FCC will say, oh, okay, if that house has it, then those other 2 houses on that census block also has it as well. I think we've learned that that's not true. So the FCC is actually putting together address level maps. So they're going to tell us every address on that census block, who's providing what, at what speeds, and so on and so forth. So we're going to get that map on November 18th. Now, is it going to be absolutely accurate? No. In fact, we've already told the FCC as of yesterday that they're missing 40,000 locations. And so the FCC has accepted that from us, and that's the difference of millions and millions and millions of additional federal dollars. Okay. Yeah, and I don't want to spend too much time because it's really 40,000 structures. So physical, like a structure, literally a building that is considered a broadband serviceable location. Like, for instance, what they will do is they will go to an Army base and say, Army base, the Army base is considered one location. When we'll say no, because there may be 100 housing units on that Army base, and so it's not one location that's serviceable, it's 100. So we actually worked with all the planning commissions, and they've pieced together that, as of yesterday, there are 40,000 of these kinds of locations that these maps are missing, that they'll include when they send out a second version of this map. Okay, so with that, we'll start these questions. And again, we need your feedback. We need you to be as vocal as possible over the next hour or so. I need you to give us your visceral reactions, your honest to goodness feedback, and let's start from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Vinny. Very, very educational there. All right, so we've got about 13 to 15 folks online watching as well. So Pearson, if you get some questions online, I'll have you ask them to the group out loud. And so we'll kind of just dive in here. So one thing as the planning district too is if you hear something and I need to come or Austin needs to come to a committee meeting or something more of a deep dive in your particular arena, we're happy to do that to collect that data as well. So even if you know, like I'm not the expert on a lot of this, but the people around me are, we're happy to come and visit with anybody that we need to collect this data. So diving in here, does your city, parish, region have existing programs or programs in development aimed specifically at addressing digital equity issues? So I know way back when this, yeah, go ahead.
Does anybody need a mic?
Yeah, anyone can
Testing.
answer these questions. Yeah, go ahead, John.
As far as programs at the parish level, we have a broadband team in place that's trying to get up to speed on these issues. We're trying to give service to the needs of this team, but we've just kind of been in the discussion stage. We haven't really tried to implement anything. We're largely waiting to find out what infrastructure's out there currently and where our gaps are.
Well, and I think that's important because that was a state initiative as well as one of Senator Cassie's to form your committee and be ready to go. So y'all are right where you're supposed to be now. And that's a question are the other communities in that arena as well? Have the library systems come together and put those folks together that are the right people in the room and things like that? So be thinking about that as well. Yes.
The library system is on our committee as well.
Oh, well,
Perfect.
perfect. Everyone's in one room.
One second, there was a question.
Oh, no, he can go, it's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Burrell.
So those are valid questions. But but I think that's slightly different than what we're trying to ask here. What we're asking here is there anything existing today that's remotely focused on addressing the digital equity? So are there libraries offering digital skills classes? Are there community colleges offering something? Is LSUS offering something? Are there, is there anything, any of the nonprofits offering something? Is NLEP doing something? So I guess that's what we're looking for is, are there existing programs? I know, the city of Shreveport has stuff that they put on garbage, and I'm gonna call on you and say, I'm just trying to, those are the kinds of things on garbage trucks to address access. I know they just launched something about, the mayor announced something with,
Universal digital access.
is that the one with the libraries where, yeah, so I guess that's what we consider existing. Did you,
Do I need the microphone?
You're good.
Our mayor, unfortunately, he didn't win re-election, but one of his campaign promises he brought to the public library about 4 years ago is what we could do to help children who didn't have internet access, either after school or after they all left the libraries. We've been working on that. Keith Hansen, who is the chief technology officer for the city, and I have been partnered trying to
And that was the one that was recently announced, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We've been working on it for 4 years, and we were rushing to get it out before the election, but we did what we could. But we're still technically in what I would call beta testing. We've got about 100 people out there right now with perfect access. So.
Good. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Miss Vanessa Brown. I represent the Salvation Army Boys and Girls Club of Shreveport. We actually have an existing program now with Comcast, and so we were able to implement the Comcast Lift Zone at our facility, which is located kind of in the heart of Queensboro. And so with the Comcast Lift Zone, it actually was implemented right when COVID hit. So for a lot of the youth that we serve, we were able to offer that internet access. They're able to go to school virtually, but individuals are also able to just simply drive on our parking lot, connect to our wireless internet, and complete any task that they would need to have. So we're just now going into our second writing phase with the Comcast grant, and now we're going to start to dive more into that digital equity, kind of being able to offer those opportunities and even starting to look at jobs in different locations. But the Comcast Lift Zone has done really amazing for our program, for the youth we serve, and even for the citizens in the community of Queensboro.
Just for the folks online there, we just learned you got to have the mic to read in there. So what was the system called that y'all had at the Shreve Memorial Library?
Universal Digital Access Services.
Okay, and so for those online, this was I'd kind of like you to go back through just real quick on it, because that was pretty cool there. And at the,
Yeah, make sure if you can to speak, because we got to record it and transcribe it and do all sorts of stuff to it.
John Tuggle, Shreve Memorial Library Director. What we started about 4 years ago in partnership with the city IT office was a way to address the lack of internet for children after school, when they were away from the school, and after they left the public library system. So we investigated about 4 or 5 different ways to do things, and it finally came down to it was just cheaper for us to build our own private cellular network, which is what we're currently doing inside the city. We're putting the CBRS antennas off libraries, off Independent Stadium, off of water towers, off of anything we can get up high enough to get through the foliage. And we currently have about 100 of those out, more or less beta testing. And Caleb, I would dare say the beta test is going well. I mean, cellular networks, we're never going to be the large Verizons and AT&T as far as being able to do that, but we can provide 4G LTE locally for free in those areas. The garbage trucks you mentioned were about 3 years ago. We did put GPS sniffers on Raspberry Pis and equip them to the garbage trucks. So we got a really good digital map of where there's a lack of Wi-Fi signal in the city. And just so happens we happen to have 5 branches right in that digital desert. So those are the 5 branches we started with. And we also offer all that digital navigator training and all that other stuff you were talking about.
What other existing programs are y'all aware of? And if you can identify yourself and your affiliation.
Good morning. I'm Philip Martin. I'm with LCS Noah Library. I'm the Digital Strategies and Technology Librarian. We're offering workshops. We're currently trying to address like digital literacy issues. Me and my colleagues are wanting to do research on that, so we're currently working on that. We have all kinds of technology we offer. We've got laptops, adapters, graphing calculators, GoPros, mini projectors, ring lights, presentation monitors, noise canceling headphones, basically a bunch of expensive items. And also I'm new, so I'm currently learning what we have to offer. But right.
Verizon hotspots. Okay.
And in talking to Philip earlier, in a prior life, the Bossier Parish library system also offers hotspots to be checked out as well. So, and y'all do as well.
You
Right.
What other, anyone else?
Any other best practices? I think that's a good.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll go to item 2 there. So anybody online or in the room that you think of something, that QR code will lead you to the questionnaire there online. All right, still under regional assets there. Does your city, parish, region have resources you are putting towards addressing the digital divide and digital equity issues?
So the question, the next question, and it hasn't flipped up, okay, here it is resources. I want you all to think about, so the pandemic happens. It sounds like some of these things that you guys were either, some of the programs in the previous slide were either things that were maybe in process before the pandemic, and then it bubbled up as a result of the pandemic. But are there resources, financial or otherwise, that y'all are aware of that are being invested in as a result of the pandemic? So pandemic happens and you're like, shoot, I didn't know this. I think we need to put more resources to doing something. Yes? Sorry. And John, if you don't mind.
Thank you. John Atkins, Caddo Parish Commission. The parish has set aside $2 million to facilitate this activity. You know, obviously $2 million doesn't go that far in a large infrastructure project, but it could facilitate training or consulting services or things of that nature.
It's a great start. Yeah. Perfect.
You know, one thing I'll add, the CDC there, we're also the workforce grant holder for the 10 parishes, minus the city of Shreveport. And so we support the American Job Centers, which are in many rural communities around the area as well as the city of Shreveport. And there's computers and digital access at those sites too to help people kind of bridge that gap as well. With that as a best practice, there's also 3 sources of funding for people to get training to get back in the workforce, and many of those digital jobs are in high demand. And so those are other options to help folks get integrated into the new working system.
So that's a solid start, John, investing $2 million and getting the Caddo leaning in. Anyone else that y'all are aware of that's now beginning to realize, okay, I think we need to allocate people or resources, financial or otherwise, to addressing digital equity issues that were defined? If the answer is, no, then that's fine. We'll have to figure that out. Okay?
All right, we'll move on.
Oh, sorry. He's got it.
Perfect. All right, digital equity barriers.
Oh, there's plenty of this. Yes. This should be, this question should take the rest of the hour, but.
I just wanted to add, Commissioner Burrell is chairing our broadband committee, but we've been struggling internally about what's the best way to spend this money. And so we're open to, we don't want to go down at least I don't want to see us go down a total different rabbit hole than what the rest of the state's going down or what your organization's going down. So at least I'm personally open to guidance in that matter as to how these funds can be best
Perfect.
utilized.
Thanks, John. So let's talk about barriers. And let's talk about barriers from the perspective of, remember that, I think it was the second or third slide that Bump had. It was that slide that had those red blocks, right? So think about the veterans groups. Think about, if you go back to that red, oh, here we go. Think about these organizations here that you are either on the board of, very familiar, right? Higher ed, public housing authorities, right? First responders. From their perspective, knowing what you know, where do you think some of the barriers are? Or what are some of the barriers that these folks are having when it comes to digital equity challenges? And we're going to say access for everyone and affordability is applied, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, my thoughts are where we are building a lot of these facilities now for housing, that those companies or contractors or whomever are actually thinking far enough ahead to equip those buildings with some sort of broadband or internet access. I'm not clear on whether or not that is being done. We have a number of low-income housing, affordable housing units that are coming up now, and I'm really concerned as to whether or not they are putting facilities there, because affordability is a problem. If you look at Caddo and look at the poverty rate, we have a relatively high poverty rate, and a lot of these people, persons or households may not have the resources to access it, to access internet or broadband.
What other barriers do y'all see? Yes, Senator?
I think, as I've had the privilege of going virtually to every parish, knowledge and information seems to me to be one of the biggest barriers, is that people are anxious to get started and to move in the right direction. But I think the more we become informative in providing those resources to the public. Also, Venice, I'd like for you, if you would, to speak about the role that might be played by our community colleges, our LSUS, our Northwestern State. What role do we have many things in place right now that have high technology. How can that be transferred out to housing projects, to locations that right now really have more questions than we have answers for?
So, Senator, I will wait till we get to question 7 to answer that.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. And if you don't mind identifying yourself.
My name's Adrienne Crawford. I'm from Bossier Parish Community College, Dean of the Learning Resources Center. Bossier Parish used a lot of the federal grant money to purchase Chromebooks for their students, and then we still hit the barrier of no internet access to those students because a lot of our students are coming from the rural areas. I think that's an even bigger issue. I think it's more prevalent to not have Wi-Fi access outside of the city limits than it is within. Although we have libraries in some of these rural areas, it's not necessarily that the libraries are open, you know, when the students need them. So I'm just speaking on behalf of the student population in that area. A lot of them work. So schoolwork is getting done in the middle of the night. So that's the issue we're dealing with, lack of access.
It's a good point about library hours not aligning with when people need it, which then means it's a function of extending time, staff, money, and so on and so forth. That's a great point. We've heard that a couple of times in other libraries throughout the state. What other barriers?
Has anybody had language barriers come up as an issue?
Kathy, you had some.
Oh, sorry.
I'm Kathy Babers with Congressman Mike Johnson's office, and one of the barriers we see is on the elderly side, you know, with VA benefits you mentioned specifically, and our VA access and all of that. You know, a lot of things are going digital and online, reimbursements, for example. So I think a large barrier has to do with training, you know, basic, simple training for elderly who are not very familiar with how to access these things, how to even, you know, they may pay and get internet, but they don't exactly know what to do, where to go, how to even navigate through some of these things. So that's a barrier as well. You know, so it's just kind of on that aspect of it. We get a lot of calls with asking for help or those kind of things, you know, would be extremely helpful.
That's a great point. The elderly population is especially in rural areas where you do have a majority elderly population. They're the ones that really need the help the most.
For sure.
Great point.
I think one other area, since I've worked at a nonprofit, ran a nonprofit for 20 years, is that many of our nonprofit organizations, not our major ones, the smaller ones that connect with certain people in communities, that they don't have the proper training, because this is going to have to be your resource. And I've always said that some people don't believe that much in nonprofits, but to look at how they function, $1 in terms of output, the ratio is 1 to 7. So looking at it from that standpoint, if you could invest in those, I think you have better penetration. And what I'm hearing is, here, you have a lot of different programs there, but from my perspective, being a telecommunication engineer for 22 years, is the penetration of the concentration that you have of internet service within a community. You could have spots, but what is the concentration of penetration there?
Right. What kind of barriers were faced by the faith-based community? Is it very similar?
Very similar. Let me add that I deal with a lot of churches, and although they may have internet access in their church, but they don't put it out to their congregation. So it's providing the information and knowledge to their congregation, which would be a great help overall.
Yes.
I was going to mention, I come into this recently is accessibility issues with like hearing impaired and visually impaired. We have students who are wanting to read their textbooks, but they're unable to read it. They don't have a screen reader. They don't have, just basic stuff to be able to do the things that most of us are capable of doing.
Good morning. My name is Famia Roots. I'm part of the Broadband Committee, and I also work for Ochsner Health. A couple of things that come to mind as far as barriers are concerned include basically what this gentleman just mentioned as far as any impairments that any of our patients run across. It's difficult for them to be able to see some of those things. They don't have the access to the larger screens or to the specialty items that we would typically use in a hospital setting. Also, outside of that, there's not enough organizations available in order to be able to provide a lot of the services. So, for example, when you mentioned the faith-based, one of the things that we had some issues with was finding organizations that would install the Wi-Fi into the church for a reasonable amount. Make sure that the streaming platform was readily available. Make sure the website is functional and that it has the ability to be viewed from a computer and a mobile device. So those types of barriers also exist, just having the ability to be able to do more than just the basics that you could access on a regular device.
Great. Anyone else in terms of barriers? This is great. Okay.
All right, moving on. Are there any unique digital equity barriers facing certain populations in your community?
We started touching upon that, right? The disabled community, the elderly population, but anything else that's specific to folks perhaps where, English is not the primary language or, yes, or other groups?
Of course, the fundamental issue is access to high-speed internet in the low population areas. So the rural areas in North Caddo, West Caddo, South Caddo, they all have challenges with access.
And I would just like to add that no matter where it is, rural, urban, suburban, we're still running into what we call the ALICE gap, which is the assets limited, income constrained employed group, what we used to call the working class, poor working class. And again, it really comes down to dollars and access to the internet. It's money, folks. I don't know, that's the biggest barrier I see. It's the working poor. When you're working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, it's hard to afford that $45, $50 or whatever it is, no matter even the federally funded monthly internet that's what, $10 or $20 a month. Sometimes that's a barrier too.
Although I think that is a barrier, but I think the prioritization of internet access to some parents, they don't see that as a priority for their kids. So that's a big difference. It's not many times that they can't afford it. It's just not at the top of their list.
So let's unpack that. It's not listed here, but let's unpack that. How do you, because look, statutorily, our job is to ensure everyone in Louisiana that doesn't have access to high-speed, affordable, reliable internet gets it. And effectively, our job is, for all intents and purposes, done. I mean, if we were to do the baseline. Our job is not to compel that household or small business to actually buy it. That's up to them. And we're not going to force anyone to buy anything. But I think what we recognize is that in order to accelerate Louisiana's economy and see the true impacts that high-speed, affordable internet's going to have on the health sector, on workforce, on lifting people up from poverty, on helping veterans, et cetera, helping the elderly, then we need to articulate the why. How do we do that? How do we articulate the why? Why is this important enough for someone to spend their hard-earned dollar on broadband? I'm just trying to get feedback. I'm just trying to understand. We understand this, but I'm just trying to get some ideas on how can we work together to showcase the importance.
Well, again, who's going to create this sense of priority for a family and a household? Surely it may not be the kids unless they come in and press upon their parents that this is needed. Because that parent, when they're working, they're juggling a lot of things, and they think just sending their kids to school is the best that they can do, but someone has to somehow educate them to the point where they know that if their child is not competitive with the next child because they are using those facilities, then it never reaches them. It never dawned on them how important it is.
Who should educate those folks in a community, right? Because part of this, and this is why it's really difficult, because there may be people that say, yes, I need it, but I don't know where to get started. Then going back to, does that literally mean in a small community of 2,000 people, 3,000, 4,000, having people knock on people's doors and just saying, sir, ma'am, this is how you get on the internet, this is, I can help you set, basically your local neighborhood geek squad, right? I don't know, I just.
That's a good idea.
Well, I don't know, I'm just throwing this
Yeah, but we're in public service. And if we can get out and campaign every year, I don't see why we can't put people on the ground to go to these houses and talk to them to that effect. I think too, from the school standpoint, they can somehow send information, and even whenever they send information home, I don't think the parents always get it and really understand the importance. Your child at a certain level, maybe from middle school up, maybe convince their parents. Churches, if you are able to access them, and nonprofits, that's another way of them getting out and impressing upon them. but it's going to have to be a one-on-one. They're going to have to feel comfortable in terms of the communication to convince them that
Yeah.
this is important.
It's trust.
Absolutely, it's trust. So one of the things that came to mind is it's going to have to be sold just like insurance is sold. And when I say that, that's going from whether that's in the school system, whether that is from the healthcare system. There are a lot of things that we could actually provide if those services were available. So it looks like it's something that's really expensive and people can't afford to do. But when you look at what the cost is for healthcare versus if the ability existed for people to be able to have the broadband services in their home currently, there's a system in place that we could implement that will allow you to have what's called hospital at home. We can't do that in Caddo Parish simply because we don't have the ability to be able to do so. So what that does is if a person they have the ability to be admitted into the hospital versus being able to go back home and actually be in the comfort of their own home, have devices that are set up that can actually watch them, see if, they have any falls. People are watching them 24 hours a day. Having professionals or EMTs come to their home to check on them, do their vitals, all those types of things can happen remotely in the comfort of your own home. So that's a barrier or part of the reason why we have some of those barriers.
And that's why this is going to be really fascinating over the next couple of years, because this is going to present some awesome opportunities for y'all to be creative. And I'll give you an example. When it comes to telemedicine, telehealth, whenever we have visitors that are interested in the work we do, we often send them to Clinton, Louisiana, which is about 45 minutes, an hour north of Baton Rouge. Why? Because there's a federally qualified health center, RKM, that received a $79,000 grant from the FCC to help pay for data services for 200 families, low-income families, who struggled with even getting to the clinic. So they paid for data services, they got them connected, and what you're gonna see over time is based on adoption of those families of telemedicine, you're gonna see the cost curve in healthcare starting to bend, which is what you want. You wanna bend that cost curve to the point where they're not always going to the emergency room to get a care. But you're gonna see many of those kinds of examples start to populate, and those are the kinds of things that we wanna look at seeing and exploring down the road.
I think that you would want to segment the marketplace, the state, into various categories like healthcare and
Right.
education and X, Y, and Z, and then you design a marketing plan around each sector. And like in education, for example, that would be an area where you could get the most impact early on, I think, by having a tagline or whatever that prepare your child for the future, and broadband is key to preparing your child for the future. And in everybody's book bag, you send flyers home every week or month or whatever, and it talks about the importance of broadband and the importance of the child having access to broadband. And then importantly, it has a website or phone number or whatever that people can call to gain access to the remote service provider, who then can take over that person's computer and show them how to access the information they need. I mean, it's kind of like the modern door to door. Instead of actually walking door to door, you've got a central site that people are calling into with professionals helping to hook them up. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's something to explore. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to have the service providers available.
I know there was, yes, ma'am.
So speaking about the training issue, when we sent out Chromebooks with our students, we have a huge amount of students who really didn't know how to use the device, because they're used to doing class the way I did it back in '88. Do things on paper, send it in to your teacher, teacher looks at it on paper. They weren't doing things electronically. So then the library has to step in, and we have a chat line, and we got like, I don't know how many calls a day, chat back and forth with students. How do I do this? How do I find this? And we all expect that when they come out of high school, they know how, but they don't. So it's not just the elderly that has to be trained and taught, it's also our next generation. They're needing to be trained to use computers because the phone is not the same as a Chromebook. So that's still about the training. And I know libraries can do it, and we are doing it, but we can't do it all by ourselves because people have to, we were hired for other jobs as well.
It's also having to go where they are. They don't have the time to come to us anymore. That's just the reality. Would you agree with that? Yeah, it would really need to go where they are.
That's pretty much why we set up the chat line, because they would rather chat than get on the telephone.
All right, well, I think, Mr. Burrell, go
I
ahead.
think sustainability is an issue. Sustainability from the standpoint of even if you train them, if they don't use it periodically, then all of that knowledge is lost, or usage is lost. So
No,
it needs to be something that.
You need
is
to
a
reinforce
continuation.
this. That's right.
All right, well, I think one of the key factors is nobody said there was an issue with social acceptance there. It seems like it's a marketing and awareness issue, which I think is a very solvable problem there, so. All right, anybody else have any questions on that one? Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, Dan, LSUS. I think the marketing aspect is two parts. So one, you're going to like establish the why. So why are people going to, buy broadband? But how do you get that information to the people? Like, what are they reading? Where are they finding their information? So whether it's a newspaper, whether it's, social media articles, whether it's online already, I think we have to see what is their main form of knowledge. Like, where do they get their knowledge from? Younger generation, it's going to be social media for sure. So how do we promote that to, that population, but also where are the elderly people or that population getting their knowledge from? Like, they may be stuck on a newspaper or whatever it may be. So how do we get the advertisement or that marketing to those, all populations as well? It's going to be different for all populations for sure, but I think that's a key aspect to find out what they're reading and how can your name be put on their face or like in front of their eyes, And then second part is going to be that person relationship. So whether you have, your small communities, whether you have people in there that are going and providing information on how to set up a broadband or how to set up how to work through things, someone with them to provide them information. So I think it's two parts. One, you have to get in front of their face and then have that trust and build that relationship so they can know what to do.
Thank you.
Ms. Roots has a question.
So if I'm thinking about someone coming to my home wanting to teach me how to do something, first off, you're not coming into my house to teach me anything. That's definitely a barrier. I don't know you. Same thing with as people were recently campaigning. Ringing the doorbell, I'm talking to you through the camera. I'm not talking to you directly. So it's that, I think it was mentioned before, that trust factor. And I'm not sure how we overcome that barrier, because in a world where there are scams everywhere you turn, or where crime is, out of control, how do you get into the homes of those and actually teach them how to use the devices that they have, not necessarily the ones that you have? So if I'm training someone, I want to teach someone how to use a device. I have a Dell at home. They may have a Mac at their home. So how do I teach them how to use that device to its full capacity versus the device that I'm most comfortable with?
Good point.
Let me touch on one other issue in terms of communication. Over the years that I've been in public service, in trying to access people, she's correct. A lot of people won't let you in their house anymore from a campaigning standpoint. But there's a whole segment of the population that are more audible than they are from a reading standpoint. They may not read, but they will listen. And I know radio has been a big communicating area that people have overlooked because it seemed to be antiquated, but it's not. You have a whole segment of a population that listens to radio that may not even look at television or read a newspaper. Well, newspaper is almost obsolete now because you go online. But there's still that segment of population that we're trying to get to who may even have kids that are in school in order to try to teach them the importance and to do that prioritization that we're talking about that needs to come in from an audible standpoint, not necessarily from a reading standpoint.
Good point. All right, any further thoughts on that one? All right, move on to the next one here. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit. I think President Atkins even talked about it. Existing digital equity plans. Does your community, business, or organization have a digital equity plan in place or under development? So I know Caddo Parish has formed a group there and funded that group, which was an important step there. Has any other organization, I know a lot of the organizations in here are on those groups as well that the parishes has formed. Does anybody have any further?
Does the city of Shreveport have a digital equity plan?
Not that I'm aware of. But the city is working hand in hand with the library. The library has two different avenues we're going down. We work with an organization called the Urban Library Council based out of DC, and we are working with urban libraries across the country on what we call a digital equity plan. So it's a national plan for public libraries in large urban areas. And we're also, the library, I don't know about the city, but is a member of the Schools, Hospitals, and Library Broadband Coalition.
Shelby.
Yeah, and you guys are probably aware of all them, and we're looking at anchor institutions, and that's some of the things that the city's doing. So it's not really a hard plan, but it is an organization we're working with.
We talk a lot about the public side. I've always been interested in why the private sector side is not normally talked about from the standpoint, what obligation do they have to the community other than making money? Now, let's just face it, I've been on both sides of it, so I've made that argument a number of times, but I always hear the public side, but I never hear the private side.
So the internet service providers recognize that from their perspective, adoption and uptake, which are really the same meaning, could be better in a place like Louisiana, but it could be better in a lot of places in the country. And what that means is the level of subscribership to not necessarily to a service, but or neither to a particular type of service, which then goes back to the question of articulating why this stuff is important. Because the challenge they have is, I'm going to lay this infrastructure, but if only 2 people out of 1,000 actually subscribe, then that's a problem. So I think that the internet service providers have a vested interest to drive adoption. I think what they're looking for are ideas from folks like y'all and others to work with them to drive that adoption, right? And so that's one thing. The second is, I think, David, we were in Schriever, Louisiana, which is basically Houma. Which is really Thibodaux, just south of Thibodaux. And I think their healthcare hospital is looking at, from a new employee orientation or any new employees they bring on board, they're looking at teaching digital skills as a part of a requirement, right? Or as part of any sort of continuing education requirements that they have for all employees. So that's an example of a company saying, okay, this is really important to us. We're going to embed that as part of any new employee hire. I think if I heard that right in Schriever.
Well, just addressing your question, though, it's a digital equity plan. On the private side, they have the knowledge, many of them have the resources, but I'm not sure whether they have the commitment to either partner or help create their own
Actually,
plan.
so the other challenge I think the private sector has, frankly, is based on the conversations I have with them, they want to get engaged, but they don't know how. It's not as odd as you think, because they're like, Vineeth, we recognize that digital skilling, for instance, is important. But walk me through, I'm not, this is just a rhetorical question, right? But their question is, help me walk through what a partnership would look like that would involve our organization to do X, Y, Z. And so that's one thing. Blue Cross Blue Shield, for instance, has a model where, they partner with libraries to install or to fund Wi-Fi extenders to allow for folks to come to the parking lot of those libraries to do telehealth, to do virtual visits. So in that case, they identified that that's a need, addressing primary care access, and that's the investment that they're making. So I think part of it is, I think that's an opportunity for y'all to work with NLEP and whomever to say, look, if we're going to tackle digital skilling, for instance, what can we do together to addressing that?
Well, again, I think that having dealt with nonprofits and with the shrinking resources that they have to even try to provide a social net for the community, from the private side, the best thing you can do is go and partner and maybe underwrite some of that. They can monitor, they can do whatever they want to do.
Maybe, yeah. I think
but you don't always have that commitment to do that.
Well, I don't know the economic landscape here. I would imagine they would be willing to do it to start and seed pilots. The question is, they're going to need help from whether it's the commission or whomever. They're going to need help from y'all to say, what is the population that we want to impact? What is the size of that problem? And what does it take to demonstrate success through a pilot? I mean, we're going to have 25 million or so to execute some of these digital equity activities. And we might go down the path to do sort of a champion versus challenger model where we seed a bunch of different pilot projects and see over time which ones work, which ones don't, and then rapidly scale the ones that do work.
Vineeth, this isn't the first time that a big infrastructure has been built out. So for example, to Senator Long's story about electrification of the rural community, how was that driven? Obviously, there was the same problem of large infrastructure investments into scantily populated rural areas. How was that funded? Just by the feds? Or, TVA, I guess, was a federal program?
You mean rural electrification? How is that funded?
Yeah, we don't have to recreate the wheel here. How was it done in the past? Maybe we don't want to use the old methods, but is there some lessons learned there?
I would imagine there are, but I think the most important thing was that the recognition back then that this is such essential, critical infrastructure that
we're making the same statements now about this.
but there's a nuance between defining something as a utility and something that's not. That's the difference. Because if you define it as a utility, then regulation. Broadband is not defined as a utility in Louisiana, so then you can't thus regulate.
Well, the telephone. When I first got to Shreveport, all of these little small rural towns, they had wires. They didn't have cable. I'm not even talking about fiber cable. I'm talking just cable. And the government came in and supplemented the program to put telephone service out to the rural. True enough, they weren't able to create the concentration that is needed because people are mobile. and they may move down into Podunk, and it costs them an arm and a leg to send one line all the way there. So they have to have help to do that, going back to what the president is saying.
Anything else on this question?
Speaking to how things were done back during the electrification of the rural areas, I know that like Lafayette has LUS Fiber, their municipal internet service provider. Could services be such as LUS Fiber be established, more broadly and in more areas? And what are the challenges if that is the case?
I will leave it up to the elected officials in this parish to answer that question, frankly, right? There are only 2 municipalities that have their own infrastructure when it comes to broadband, LUS and Lafayette, and then the city of Ruston. The city of Ruston is going through a process of selling their network, though. So that's something that, whether John or Commissioner Burrell and whomever in the community, that's a conversation you all need to have.
All right, well, we'll move on to the next one here. Strategies to address digital equity. What supports does your community need to address digital equity gaps in your communities? Some of these probably overlap.
It may be
so they're-
overlap, yeah.
Well, leadership is one. In a particular community, unless they have leadership in that area, it could be, their public official. It could be their neighborhood president, if they have an organization there. It could be their churches. So leadership is going to be the key, in my opinion, to try to get this information and for them to understand and know how to articulate the issues.
I've already spoken to Representative Johnson's Kathy, and I noticed Senator Kennedy's already, his representative slipped out, but Senator Cassidy is still here. One of the things that the Schools, Hospital, and Library Broadband Coalition is working on is expanding E-rates and what it can pay for, and that would be a wonderful thing if we could do that, because you have libraries and schools and hospitals. If we could expand the E-rate, what it pays for, if it could go outside of our buildings and just outside of our property, and if it could pay for all of our internet access, no matter where we put it, and as long as library patrons or hospital patrons or school patrons are using that internet, no matter where it is, if it could be covered by E-rate, that would help those 3 institutions tremendously, because we already get that refund or the discount through the feds, and that has been a wonderful thing for the last 20 years, and we appreciate it. But as we expand our cellular network, we're going to lose our E-rate because we're moving outside of the library's actual boundaries. So that small thing alone would go a long way toward helping, like I said, schools, hospitals, and libraries expand that.
Okay. All right. Any further questions or additions on that? Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, Alan in the Zoom chat says, to the previous point, with service providers dropping support for traditional copper phone lines, in many cases not allowing new subscribers, and the increasing reliance on mobile communications just for telephony, should we be looking at expanding 5G in state or federally funded tower buildings?
I'm assuming, is that from Alan? I'm assuming Alan's talking about funding for wireless infrastructure, like towers. Is that? I'm gonna assume. I'm gonna make that assumption, which may or may not be valid. But I think his question was, regarding investing in towers, right? Wireless infrastructure. So I think if, you know, and we were actually meeting, we were with the governor and we were with one of the larger companies that actually build wireless infrastructure. So they actually build the towers that you see throughout the state, or throughout the country. And what I said to the group yesterday was that our goal is to achieve ubiquity when it comes to broadband access. And what that means to us is, regardless of where you are in the state of Louisiana, whether you're at home or whether you're on the road, you need to have 4 or 5 bars on your phone. You need to be able to facilitate a Zoom call. You need to be able to facilitate a variety of different things. That just doesn't exist today. It doesn't exist on the wireless side. It doesn't exist on the fixed wireless side. It doesn't exist on the actual fixed wire line to the house or the business. So depending on how things shake out in terms of our state's allocation, and if we feel that there is a case to be made on that satisfies the federal requirements with regards to our infrastructure dollars, that allows for us to invest in wireless infrastructure, the towers itself, then that may be a path that we go on. Because I think there is a significant deficit of wireless infrastructure in Louisiana. I mean, we'll drive from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, for instance. As you get to Laplace, your cell phones drop. As we get close to exit 138 on I-49, we're at a bar or two, right? So it's a challenge that we'll aggressively look at addressing based on the math and understanding of what that takes and the federal rules.
Well, one of the issues that we get into in terms of transmission, I look at it from the standpoint of transmission, is that Louisiana is a heavily, how would you say, an area that has a lot of green, has a lot of trees, let's put it that way, and canopies. And you can't get certain services if you can go down the interstate and get between a swath of trees, and you can't hear anything, or your telephone lines drop. So you're going to have to deal with those issues, I would think.
Yeah, and I think there are technologies advanced far enough to overcome not the entirety of that problem, but a significant majority of that challenge.
It's going to have to be a mixture of.
It'll have to be a mixture. Okay.
Ms.
Yes. Ms. Roots.
So to get us back on track, some of the support that I think our community is going to need is probably going to be best served by doing focus groups with the community.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We can come up with all of the things. The primary thing from this room is training and money. But there's got to be some other things that the people who actually are struggling with it or who may be hesitant to adopt it, they probably have a lot of the ideas that you're actually looking for.
Yeah, and we're going to do that. This was the first level of stakeholder engagement, but we'll work very closely with the planning commissions to do a significant deeper dive to the end consumer to understand his or her challenges.
All right,
It's on my to-do list.
Keep moving here. So this is the last item. I know we're getting close on time there. With communication, as we work to address digital equity, are there specific modes of communication that we should consider to reach specific stakeholder groups? And I think you just hit on a couple of those. So does anybody have anything to add to that or different methods?
I know John talked about PSAs, but even more fundamental and basic, from my perspective, is do the people in your community, are they aware of what y'all do, of what exists? Because there's stuff that do exist here. Let's start with that question.
I'll say no. I ask that question all the time. How are we feeding this information to our community? And because many of them are just not aware some are not aware of even the lingo. I mean, what does it mean? So it's definitely an educational issue from that perspective. So,
Okay.
going back to mode of communication, you remember I mentioned things that are audible to a whole segment of this population. That's communication itself. And I think at some point we got to make this thing sexy, if I can use the term. That allows people to think that if they don't have it, then there's something wrong with us. How you do that, can't say it, but it's going to have to be something that's going to be attractive to them.
Yeah, I mean, just like what he said, we would, I think it'd be beneficial to have some sort of like social media manager that would be involved in making sure that, you know, whatever the latest hotness is in the social media realm, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, whatever media it is, you know, maybe the person who needs the help in that moment isn't able to see that content because they are having the issue themselves, that they do not have access to the technology that they need. But they may have a family member that does have access, or a friend that does have access that sees that content. You know, maybe it's a short TikTok or what have you that has a QR code on it where they can scan that QR code and go to find out more information. Just putting it in front of their face in the places that they're actually looking, I think is definitely important.
Anybody have any other suggestions on that? All right, well, we are close on time there, so that was the last question there. So basically, let me go back a couple to kind of tell you next steps. Appreciate everybody in the room's comments. Matthew's been typing constantly the whole time. Thank you all. We had a small group, but a very informative group there. So again, we kind of went over this earlier. This is a schedule of events and how things are happening. We're currently in the red section there as we do the data collection. In the last quarter of this year, Matthew and his group will start compiling the data and putting that together. And then in the spring of 23, we will start to formulate that plan. And by April of 23, we will have that plan. And so shovel ready, project worthy, whatever it may be, the term there, that'll give Vineeth and his group the opportunity to go to petition to get us what we need to make this stuff work out very well. So again, if any of your groups, if Austin, Pearson, or myself as the planning district need to come to a committee meeting or anything of that nature to help you disseminate this information, to get the feedback, the QR codes are there. Other than the one with the dinosaur, that's for the data, but the ones towards the end of the slide like this one, that's the one where you can go in and input your information there as well. So we're happy to come out to talk to any of those groups in the region. And Vineeth, I'll kind of give you closing remarks there.
No, and look, thank you again, Bump and Austin and the folks here, of course, LSU Shreveport. I think really thanks to all of you. We as an office, we're a team of 3, but we actually enjoy coming to every stakeholder engagement meeting because we actually pick up something new in every meeting. But we also see, and it's amazing because this is, I think, our 6th, and we're going to be in Monroe. You're beginning to see very common themes that are being addressed. And it's going to be, so we're beginning to see a little alignment. But to your point, I've got on my to-do list a group of organizations that we want to do a deeper dive, right? So we need to spend time with the folks that are the disabled community, because that is a community that we need to engage with. Let's say in the New Orleans area, we need to engage, for example, the Asian community or the Vietnamese population, right? The Hispanic population. So there are different segments that I need to spend a little bit more time on just to get their perspective, folks that are in the healthcare space, tribal leaders, and so on and so forth, the elderly, veterans. So we'll do that between now and the next couple of months. But this is a great conversation, great start. And David and I we are grateful to you spending 2 hours on a Thursday. I know tomorrow's a holiday, right? Tomorrow's a holiday. And so for those that are veterans out there, happy Veterans Day, and look forward to connecting with you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.